A topic that caught my eye, I thought was very interesting. Frank Warren appealing to Eddie Hearn, wanting the two to get together and make some of the big fights. And this is not some sort of throwaway line, some sort of comment he's made off the cuff. It's a coordinated effort. Media graphics were produced. They went alongside the interview that he'd done with BT, calling on Eddie Hearn. Let's do it for the fans. Let's make these big fights, get them done. And the 10 fights, I've just got the list here. Edwards versus Yafai, Gorman and Allen. There's 4 heavyweight fights that are listed. The other ones are Dubois and White, Fury and Joshua, Joyce and Chisora, Yard and Buatsi, that's at light heavyweight, Williams and Andrade, Jenkins and Ben, Sharp and Barrett, and Shiraz and Cheeseman. So Frank Warren sort of doing a bit of a change of tack in public, because remembering until now they've been concentrated on their own shows. There's been a bit of a cold war of sorts in recent years. Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren don't really get along. Frank Warren has made no secret he hasn't got a lot of time for Eddie Hearn, but clearly they want to. He wants to maybe break bread, get around the table with Eddie Hearn and see what they can do. And there's a little bit of context that I want to sort of set the scene here, because I know that there will be some fanboys of the respective promotional outfits, either Matchroom or Queensbury. And to me, being a fanboy of a promoter never makes sense. But when you step back and look at what Frank Warren's saying, the gist of it is actually, I think it's a good idea. Haven't we been calling for best fight the best, all that sort of thing forever and a day? And since we've had these cards back after the pandemic, or, after lockdown has sort of eased in some parts of the world, you've got these cards that we've all been moaning about. We've been saying that they've been mostly garbage. I think some of the top-ranked cards, they haven't been much chop. Frank Warren in the first Matchroom card, they've been okay, but the reality of the situation is money is tight. They're not spending a lot of money on some of these cards. No crowd, they've got to sort of cut their cloth accordingly, which means putting on cheaper cards, which means lesser known fighters than some of the bigger names that we would want to see in the ring. So this is some sort of Frank Warren trying to bridge the divide between him and Matchroom. And it's interesting, some of the rationale for it, it'll be speculation from a lot of us, because do we know what the motivation is here? Has he been told by BT, remembering some of the ratings have been reported as low, look, we need some better fights? And actually, as a fan, I'm all for this sort of thing. I think, more of these sort of big fights, the better, across all levels of boxing and outside the heavyweight division, which I cover. I'm a boxing fan. I watch it like everyone else every weekend, and, I want to see these big fights getting made. The heavyweight fights, and we'll come to those as well, those for the most part, they're good fights. So unrivaled boxing talk and news with the super chat saying, is Frank being serious or desperation from a wounded dog on its last legs? Well, that will be a question that people will be asking. Why now? What's happened to prompt him to go public? And it's a coordinated PR effort. Remembering he's also got Tyson Fury on board saying a public statement via his social media. It was coordinated with BT. You have the graphics of the fights that they would like. This didn't just happen by accident. They want to make some of these fights. And why now? And like I said, maybe it's some of the ratings. Maybe there is some other things. And I guess one thing to sort of just throw in here, one of my old bosses once said, nothing sharpens the mind like the side of the guillotine. So perhaps there is a little bit of stress in the Frank Warren organization, be that pressure from external forces, maybe BT, or maybe the financial aspect. It's got to be tough right now for any promoter. It's a very uncertain time. And if you start to lose money on shows because there is no crowd revenue, etc., it's going to be tough to come back. I'd imagine that a lot of these promoters that are coming back right now, you can think, not just Matchroom and Queensbury, but the other ones, Top Rank, PBC with their cards. It's the broadcasters' money that's paying for it. They'll be cutting their cloth accordingly. But, even for them, it's tough. And others, that don't have a TV deal, it's got to be even worse. But I'll just get back to my notes here, the sort of things that I was looking to just say as context before I sort of get to your thoughts. So I just wanted to whip through a few things to set the scene for context. So essentially, I'll just run down my bullet points here. He's saying, come on, Eddie Hearn, let's make the big fights for the fans. 10 fights, 4 at heavyweight. I like the idea. After all, these are the fights that we've been asking for. But the question is, why now? Another question, how realistic is this? Can Frank and Eddie work together? And some will no doubt be saying and thinking, is Warren on the decline? Is he in trouble? And I've already seen on social media some people questioning, is he coming off as desperate? But I think we should want, because I know some people may be celebrating a potential decline of Frank Warren, but in any market, and the UK boxing market has been sort of on fire for the past couple of years, you want good competition. You want good, strong competitors, opposing forces, because healthy competition is good for the sport. It helps grow the sport, more TV dates, all that sort of stuff. But monopolies, if one develops, it ends up leading to reduced competition and ultimately wages and that sort of thing. Conditions lessen. And that's not just, a boxing thing, that's just monopolies in general. So, and you can sort of probably think of a comparable example with the UFC, which has a bit of a sort of stranglehold on MMA in the American market. And we're always hearing how boxers are getting 70% of the revenue, something like that. Whereas in the UFC, it's more like 20%. So there's a big sort of gap. And part of the reason that they've been able to put on good cards is that their cards are cheaper to put on as compared to big time cards for boxing, where boxers are getting healthy purses. Shakur Stevenson the other month got $700K for fighting, basically, I've forgotten the guy's name. So it's those sorts of purses that you kind of go, wow, that's pretty healthy in boxing, but a comparable fighter in mixed martial arts would be getting far less, maybe 100,000 or 200,000. But getting back to the chat, just off my notes here, and do want to get your thoughts on this situation. Because Frank Warren coming out and saying this stuff, he has sort of said, similar things before, but this is a more coordinated effort. And if they are sort of feeling the pinch from either BT through ratings or finances or whatever, they want some big fights to come off. So, and as a fan, I would hope that would happen. I know some people may sort of celebrate and say, well, Frank Warren's on the decline, but I think it's good, as I just mentioned, to have healthy competition. And if Frank Warren is in a good state in terms of his stable, being able to run it, Queensbury and that, I think that's better for the sport. More opportunities for fighters to get exposure, get paid, and, we can see them and, the sport that we love. But getting back to the chat here, so Will Magic Man says, salute Boxing Squared, smash that like button on the way in. Yes, please. Joseph Bacon is in the building. Perm X says, why did he block Jenkins from fighting Ben? That's a good question, because I do remember actually Jenkins was on the Boxing Asylum podcast maybe a month or 6 weeks ago, and he was all for it. He wanted to fight Conor Benn. He was hoping he could potentially get a slot. He was optimistic that he may get that fight, but then it got blocked. But that is one of the 10 fights that has been named as one that Frank Warren wants to happen. And he says this is one of the, who wants it, that's part of the graphic, who wants it. That was a fight that could have been made, probably should have been made, and it would have been ideal for these cards, either Frank Warren's or these Fight Camp cards. So I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but clearly it didn't happen. And I guess in these sort of situations, even in the best, find it hard to work together. So even if they could come together, break bread, how would this work? It kind of feels like it'd be a pretty awkward sort of marriage. And would they have to get Barry Hearn involved to deal with Frank Warren? I don't know. That question about how realistic it is. And, if it doesn't happen, if this sort of comes to nothing, then there'll be mudslinging from both sides. But clearly a coordinated attempt from Frank Warren to get something going here. Yeah, some people will say this is just a publicity ploy, which I just see unrivaled Boxing Talk and News saying. So he says the pandemic-induced climate, it's obviously unobtainable and a publicity ploy. I could very well see if something doesn't happen, if it comes to nothing, he'll then turn around and say, well, these guys didn't want to make it. Getting back to the some other comments here in the chat. Will Magic Man says Dubois versus White is a mouth-watering proposition. That is a good fight and one I'd want to see. And it's not just the politics of the division and the promotional elements. They're at different stages of their career. And I'm sure Daniel Dubois would leap at the chance to face Dillian Whyte. But Whyte, who is facing Alexander Povetkin August 22nd, I don't think he would be looking to give Dubois a leg up. He wants to wait for his title shot next. So if he beats Alexander Povetkin, I don't think he'd be looking to create shortcuts for Dubois. I just don't see it. And one thing to consider with all this as well, and as part of the why now, if they really wanted to do this and change tack so publicly like this, and it's a bit of a sort of organizational shift saying, look, we're going to make all the big fights with you now, why didn't they get round the table months ago? They had ample opportunity. There was no fights for, 3 months? And we knew that there was going to be a bit of a shutdown. It started to come, and obviously no fights for a number of months, and it slowly wanted to really push this. Could have been pushed months ago. Why is it coming back after the first couple of shows? Because both respective promotional outfits, said what they were going to do in terms of their comeback cards, and they've done it. And now we get this sort of thrown into the mix. It's interesting. Permex says, pick up the phone, Frank, stop talking to the media. And that's part of the thing now. If he wants something to happen, maybe he does need to go a bit further than just saying it in public. Try to get round the table. Make it more than just looking like a publicity ploy. Lewis says, good morning from California, US, 3 a.m. over here. Wow, that's pretty early there. It's 10:17 p.m. here in New Zealand. And yes, I for those who are new to the channel, I am from New Zealand. Often I get people thinking I'm either from Australia, that is quite a frequent one, or the UK. But no, I am from New Zealand, 10:17 p.m. here. So Peter Montgomery says, it sounds like some naughty geezers need paying, and COVID means Bricktop is having trouble with his I'll pay you now and double next week routine. Well, the speculation will begin on what is the genesis of this coming out so public, and it's a coordinated effort with BT and graphics and all that sort of stuff. Lee says, Frank is full of it. Lawrence says, what's good? Lawrence got a great channel, as does Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News. Both those guys, very good at deep knowledge of the, all boxing divisions, really. I see Unrivaled's been having a bit of back and forth with Ring IQ about a clash at 115. Tim says, monopolies are bad for athletes, but geez, you got a lot of big fights as a fan. Yeah, I guess that's the thing for fighters. It may not be so good for them, but as a fan, if you're getting the UFC, sort of most of the big matchups are happening and regular, you got to be pretty happy about that. And I think some of that, with the pandemic and coming back, clearly they've been starting to get a bit of market share and traction. I'm seeing on my Twitter more UFC-related stuff than ever before. And remembering, I'm on Twitter as is solely a boxing account. It's, it's not anything else. It's not personal, other bits and pieces. So, yeah, I've seen a lot more UFC timeline, which to me shows that I think the UFC has been making some gains during this pandemic period. And it's not surprising given some of the quality cards that they've had. And I'm not like a big UFC guy. I don't really want to pay $60, $70, $80 or whatever like pay-per-views. Well, they've been competitive matchups and some, good rematches. There's just been some quality fights, and we're sort of seeing less of that on the boxing world. So Lee says, Frank is delusional. Bye-bye, old fish eyes. Unrivaled says, we went through that before. Lee says he's trying to rush Dubois when it's undeserved. Dubois has done nothing yet. I don't think it's just about Dubois. I think this is a bit more broader, and there's probably a few different things that we're not privy to that have, as we're going to be speculating about, and it's natural too. Why now? What's happened? Why is this being pushed? But Daniel Dubois in a very handy position, number 3 in the WBO. Even if he doesn't manage to land, say, a White fight or anything like that, or any fights with a matchroom fighter, eventually he's going to get into an eliminator for that WBO mandatory. So Lee says Dubois doesn't deserve White. Well, I'm not sure that White would even sort of consider that. Wexford DJ says they need to work together to create great cards as this virus looks like it's going to get worse for at least the next year, hampering any winners. And if they are serious about this, like I say, get round the table. Maybe put something on, something experimental to see if it can work. I think that would be a good solution because nobody wants to see, any of these big promotional outfits fall apart at a time when, it's a precarious situation with the pandemic. And if people put aside their biases about if they're supporting one promotional outfit over another, I think the competition and having fighters on cards and, the sport being strong, that's what we should be thinking about. So I think Wexford DJ raises a good point that, this situation with the pandemic could drag on and there needs must potentially at some point. It may be sort of sitting pretty at the moment in terms of, the bottom line for Matchroom, but if Frank Warren is hurting now, other promoters are probably going to be hurting soon as well. I think that could be a reality if things really, if the paradigm continues to be far different from what it was pre-pandemic. Unrivaled says, isn't it obvious why he's trying to rush him? How many years of life does the man have left? That's ruthless. Reed and Smith says, Frank did go to Sky 3 weeks ago, was seen there. It'll be interesting because Sky and Matchroom's exclusive deal, I understand, is up at some point. And with Matchroom being spread a bit thin with their stable in the UK and the US, remembering the UK stable has been propping up, and this is pre-pandemic, a number of those US shows. You'd have to imagine some of the quality of the cards hasn't been what Sky would have thought it would be for some of those Sky fight nights. So I wouldn't be surprised if Sky opens it up a bit. And if they do open it up a bit and have, some more competition and maybe Frank Warren, I don't even know what the deal is with his BT deal there. There probably is some outs there for BT if they're not happy with the product. But, if Warren was able to have some shows on Sky, well, that sort of removes some barriers right there. But I wouldn't mind seeing other promoters get some TV slots too, because there are other promoters out there in the UK market who can run some good shows, some good competitive shows. It doesn't always have to be the biggest names, but if you can have some shows, say at the York Hall or something like that, or a Dennis Hobson show in Doncaster or wherever, you can get some good 50-50 matchups. If you can get some good TV fights, good action, that keeps people happy. So King O says, I don't get it. What happens after this collaboration? Does Warren then start inviting Eddie out for a drink? The guy has spent years hating on Matchroom, 1118 here in London. And Unrivaled said it was 1118 there in Ireland. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of questions about, what's been happening, why now? But good questions there about if the collaboration does happen. Where does that lead? I think that's a good question to ask. Do they have an experiment? But if things do work out well, then what? I think that's a very good question to ask. Joseph says, White could defend against Dubois if he had a title, but it doesn't make sense unless Bricktop robbed a bank. Lee says Frank is skint. Bottom line is he's begging. Lee says Frank should pay for that dent to be repaired. Ruthless. Unrivaled says I would love a monopoly in boxing again, a la Don King. However, it would require a massive buyout of all the promotional companies, which frankly is absurd, from the Ali Act, the promotional Cold War. Yeah, I'm personally more in favour of competition. And if there is more TV involved, but I think it would be good to go back to some of the days where you had more boxing on terrestrial TV. As it is, even with basic subscriptions, wherever you are in the world to some sort of cable channel, I sort of remember some of the days where, say, for example, here in New Zealand, I think it was 1997, was it 96 or 97? It was the launch of a channel. It was called C4. The first event was Tyson Holyfield. That was fantastic. And being able to sort of see that stuff and not have to, see it on a tape or something like that, being able to watch it beamed in live. It was incredible. And I think a lot of people were exposed to, and not just boxing, say 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was on, terrestrial channels that you could just get. You didn't have to, it wasn't behind a paywall of sorts. You didn't have a set-top box. Fraser says, Sky as a company does not like putting all its eggs in one basket. I've dealt with them a lot, and in most cases they have at least 2 suppliers and everything in case one goes south. Well, they could be looking at some of this, and remember, throw in DAZN here. They've got their worldwide launch coming up. Remember, Eddie Hearn and Matchroom have very much hitched their wagon to DAZN, at least in the American market at this point. But what's going to happen with those fights? There's going to come a time where the Sky probably is going to have to bite the bullet and look at their offering and what they're doing. It wouldn't surprise me if they have multiple promoters sort of in the tent. And, that's something they've had before. Fish R1200R says, Frank under pressure from BT Simples. Yeah, well, some of those ratings figures, if you believe those numbers, I don't know how accurate they are, but what was an average of 3,000 for that last card, a peak of 26 or something like that, as per Mike Coppinger. Even if it's a bit more than that, when you consider that it's a market with 65 million people in the UK, and then you have only a fraction will have Sky and BT and their boxing fans and watching it, but that's still 3,000 is incredibly low, embarrassingly low if that's true. And if you were BT putting in all the production and effort, because this is, for them, it's not just for Frank Warren, it's not a hassle, it's for the network. They need these live sports. They've been losing all these around the world. Subscription services for all manner of things have been losing subscribers hand over fist. You want a good product to promote. And if you're only drawing in 3,000, it's not saying about how the market is responding to your offering. AA Boxing and Blunt says maybe MTK could do a show using their fighters who are signed to both promotions. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely MTK's got a pretty decent stable of fighters. There's definitely scope for them to be sort of deployed all over the place, and they obviously do their own shows too. And how an organization like them, with different shows in different markets, is going to respond in this time, that's also another question. There's a lot of, and I know MTK compared to others is probably in a better financial situation, some of the reasons for that unclear potentially, but in terms of some of the other smaller promoters, I mean, imagine how they must be hurting right now. So compared to Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn with their respective stables, there's a lot of these guys that are sort of under no TV deal. They're going to be doing it tough. So Creasus33 says, hey there boxing, finally I catch one of your live streams after a long time. Well, this was just an impromptu one. I did signal in my heavyweight news mashup video after this Frank Warren public sort of appeal to Eddie Hearn, let's make the big fights, let's do it for the fans, that it's an interesting topic because it's a shift in tact very publicly from Frank Warren, and it was a coordinated PR push by Frank Warren and BT. You had graphics with all the fights. This didn't happen in 5 seconds. They've been planning to do this. And what are the drivers for that? It's a bit unclear, but people will speculate. I've seen some people saying that Frank Warren may be a bit, getting a bit of a push from BT. Maybe there's financial issues that are driving, that they have to make some of these fights. Clearly, both stables have been largely working separately for quite some time. Quite acrimonious between Warren and Eddie Hearn. They haven't had a lot of time for each other. So, yeah, we'll see if anything comes of this. It's interesting. But Woka Sam says Usyk versus Chisora would be announced after the Povetkin fight. Well, hopefully some fights continue to be announced, because that fight in particular, if it just sort of drags on, it may just never happen. So Unrivaled says, I get the idea of preferring competition. I'd just rather the competition be in the ring and not in the boardroom. I guess, there's the perils of boxing. It's a business disguised as a sport. And the out-of-the-ring stuff, unfortunately, just bleeds far too much into the in-ring sort of happenings of fights getting made or otherwise. So that's just, yeah. And there seems to be no simple solution for some of the stuff either. because, people are always sort of coming up with different ideas. How can we clean up the sport or change the sport, get rid of the sanctioning bodies? Yeah, but a lot of the players involved, and I imagine a lot of the promoters don't too, because, the promoters at the top, they're the ones benefiting the most from the current situation. I don't think there's an appetite for change to change boxing. It's probably always going to be sort of, doing it to itself. I mean, it's become such a niche sport over time, which is a shame because, its heyday in the 70s, and it was still a massive sport in the 90s, and it's just drifting off a little bit over time into obscurity. It's not what it once was, and it could be, but, fans can't follow all the shenanigans, and, they're not putting up with it. Over time, people have just dropped off. So Fish says, until there's an independent body to force alphabet promoters to toe the line, we're going to have to put up with a bully at infinity. Well, even one independent, and it's probably being boxing, going to be prone to corruption. So Fish says, argue, marinate, screw the fans, repeat forever. Yeah, well, often fans are the ones, we end up being at the bottom of the heap. Things don't really work well. But actually, for this live stream, when I get off, I've already come up with the thumbnail, and it was something that came up, must have been a few months ago, and this was at a time where a fight between White and Dubois, which Frank Warren's mentioned a number of times. So it's got, you may recall that graphic at the time when it came out, British. So yeah, perfect, given some of the same fights have been mentioned. So Tim says, just wish the fans could unite and decide they're not going to recognise certain belts. Personally, I'd ditch the IBF or WBA or both, but people got to unite and pick one or two, or join the OBO, or to go join the IBO as a joke. Well, I think some of the issue for the sport too is it's become so almost like, because remember, it's an individual sport, but you end up being a boxing fan of not just one fighter but multiple fighters. But it's become like people are supporting promotional outfits, and rather than fighters across the spectrum that are through multiple promotional outfits. I don't get some of that, and I know most people listening to the stream and who sort of follow the channel generally they are fans of the sport, not pushing promotional barrows, which has sort of seemed weird to me, people being fanboys of promoters. Says, not surprised BT's viewing figures were so low. Matchroom actually put on a bit of a spectacle for the circumstances. Frank just plays room. Well, some of that would have probably been BT's call, because I'm sure Frank Warren wouldn't have wanted in these times to, put something in his back garden and chalking up £1 million of cost, because that's a big gamble to take. And I do agree that, the spectacle, it was a bit more polished for the Matchroom card, but their averages in terms of the figures for that first card, I think it was an average of 93,000 fans. And I understand Sky has a lot more subscribers, so that can account for some of the extra views. But still, when you consider it's a market of 65 million people or so, and there will be millions that have a subscription, and this wasn't a pay-per-view, still feels awfully low. So it's sort of, are people, and this is one of the things I've wondered, have people just drifted away in the pandemic, some of the casuals for now, away from the sport? And if that's the case, will they come back? And if they are coming back, what's the fight? Because it's clearly not these fights. So John says, hi Boxing Squared, hello to you. John also says, missed your stream yesterday. Well, I've sort of been a little bit stream happy in the last couple of days. I think I've done 3 since last Thursday or Friday, something like that, or Saturday. And I am well, thank you for asking, John. So Retro says, I agree, Tim. I personally wish people at least recognise the ring champ as the real champ, and all others just second-rate champs. Well, the ring, it's a bit fraught now. It's a promotional, it's owned, the magazine. So, how impartial is it? You have to ask those questions. It's not like the ring hasn't been tied up in scandals before either. Rock Enrologist says, good to catch you live. Been a follower for quite a while. You're the greatest. Thanks for your priceless service to boxing fans. That's quite the compliment. Thank you for that. Frankly, I'm more interested in what happens inside the ring, not outside of it. That's a good point, but also what happens outside of it influences what happens in it, unfortunately, in boxing. Will says, surprised by the proposal of Dubois vs. White. Seems disrespectful to White to suggest throwing him in with so much experience. Yeah, I mean, I don't see that fight happening. I think they're at different stages of their career. I like the fight. I'd watch it, and, you know, that's a pay-per-view fight. But, yeah, that's probably a 2 years away type of fight. So, Crypto KR says, g'day, boys. Mikhail Coffin says, Joseph Parker is coming to destroy the division, boys. It'd be good to know what happens with his next fight, what's going to happen there. I mean, 3 tune-ups on the trot after his loss to Dillian White in 2018, mid-2018. His career has really sort of been flatlined since. But getting back to the sort of issue at hand, we're starting to get in a few other peripheral issues. Do you think it's likely this is actually going to happen? Frank Warren saying, come on, Eddie, let's make the big fights, let's do it for the fans. Can they work together? And if they can work together, what does it look like? Would they have to do something experimental to see if it could work together? Does it, you know, because remembering they've got these sort of first tranche of shows, if this has legs, could they do a couple just to sort of see how it pans out? But how does it earn the money? How does it, you know, are they basically sort of talking, is Frank basically saying, you know, with these 10 fights that he's made, that they're talking, is Frank basically saying, you know, with these 10 fights that he's made, that there's a couple of papers, look at it that way too. H Money Mr. DAZN says Devin Haney is the next Floyd Mayweather. Well, he's got to sort of fight someone first to sort of see where his level is at. But yeah, like the talent, he is a very talented fighter. That division is, you know, with Tank Davis, you've got Ryan Garcia, and a few others. It really is a stacked division, not to forget Teofimo Lopez and also Lomachenko. Retro says, okay, talking to someone else, Woker says, I mean, I would watch Eddie Hearn versus David Diamante, otherwise I'm not a fan of promoters. David Diamante, his hair is so long. It's like almost down to his feet. It's incredible. H Money Mr. DAZN, Boxing Squared, Devin Haney is the present and future of boxing. I'll take that under advisement. Thank you for the notification. Angus says, talking Devin Haney in a heavyweight channel, laughing his ass off. So Fish says, Frank saying, let's do it for the fans. Well, there is an irony of a promoter who sometimes hasn't done it for the fans. I mean, let's remember a lot of these promoters are feathering their own nest rather than doing it for the fans. You know, think about it. When were the fans really ever put first? It rarely happens. And there's no wonder people walk away from the sport because, you know, a lot of the garbage that happens and the garbage that we put up with, and then almost anything that's half decent these days is on pay-per-view. It's a bit of a joke. And to me, it's no wonder. You know, the top ranked cards, most of them have been garbage. You know, we've seen the first couple of cards by Frank Warren and also this first one by Eddie Hearn, the Fight Camp. You know, they are what they are. It's a certain level, but it's not going to get people into the sport. Those are not the sort of fights, and they're working within a budget. I can understand why they're trying to penny pinch and put on cheaper cards because, you know, no fans and no one wants to go backwards. Because if a promoter takes a loss at this point or something, remembering these aren't pay-per-view cards, you know, they could go under. So it's a time fraught with a whole bunch of issues, you know, that, you know, people never saw coming because of this pandemic, which is, you know, who knows? It's like how long is a piece of string before a new normal sort of emerges. I like the idea of these fights, but how many of them will actually happen? And if they could work together, how does that work? And what does that look like? Because I like a lot of those fights. And I think for Nathan Gorman, the Allen one, that's a perfect rebuild fight. Joyce and Chisora, for me, that seems less feasible because Chisora, who's kind of a free agent, he's been working with Matchroom, but not really signed to Matchroom. I mean, he wanted $5 million a couple of years ago, £5 million, I think it was, to face Joe Joyce. And I'm sure Dillian White, you know, even if they could stump up the bag for a Daniel Dubois to sort of buy his way to a title shot, it'd be a whole chunk of change. Where are we here? Just getting back to the chat, lost my place. Joseph says, always thought Parker would beat Wilder. I still think he could chin him on the inside. Joseph Parker's not a great inside fighter, though. That's, I think one of the comments about his fight with Anthony Joshua, even though the ref kept breaking it up on the inside, he's not great on the inside. Doesn't, often just falls in, throws one or two sort of shots to the body, sort of banging to the body once they're in the clinch, and that's about it. Mikhail says, I think Frank and Eddie's paths are inevitably going to cross each other. It will be when more interest returns to the sport and when they both... Yeah, I mean, that's a top comment because, they'll end up doing Joshua and Fury at some point and they're already probably counting the money. But in the interim, it's maybe a bit lean with the conditions that exist because of the pandemic. So Crypto KR says, ever consider streaming on Twitch? Do you mean like playing a game or something, or just doing these sorts of streams? I hadn't sort of really considered that. Fish says, Wardley looked good the other day. Dillian wants him on his undercard by all accounts. Yes, he does. And if you haven't caught the latest heavyweight news mashup video that I do cover those comments by Dillian White. And it's one of the more stacked heavyweight news mashups. It's almost about 15 minutes long, so it's pretty meaty. Some fight announcements. Dave Allen saying that he's now underrated, and he's seemingly a bit miffed. Not his words, but mine. He's a bit miffed about people saying that he, has done nothing in his career. He's sort of talking up his resume and trying to sort of justify what he's done in the sport. It was sort of an interesting post. But then, the image that he uses for the post, which has been pointed out, it's him after he's been beaten up. Fish says, oh no, we just went through that one. Jasper says, Frank needs Eddie a lot more than Eddie needs him. Yeah, to a degree, I think that's right, but things in boxing can turn very quickly, and it can be a sort of cyclical sort of sport. One day you're up, the next day you're interested. What do you think, which heavyweight prospects will really go all the way? Well, that's always a how long is a piece of string question, but I did do Best Heavyweight Prospects video for 2020 a couple of months ago. So if you do go on the channel to a playlist called Mini Documentaries, name something like that, there's about 10 to a dozen videos that I did sort of over that initial sort of April, May-ish period, and one of them was my top prospects for 2020. John says, Boxing Squared, do you watch Boxing Talk with Eddie? And if so, what are your thoughts on him? He seems to be smashing it over here. Well worth a watch on YouTube if you haven't already yet. Yeah, no, I've been subscribed to him for quite a while. He's got a great channel. Yeah, he's been doing well. There's a lot of great channels that are around on YouTube at the moment that cover, there's a number that cover, a lot of the sort of heavyweight sort of fights like I do. But yeah, Boxing Talk with Eddie is a channel that sort of covers a broad spectrum of fights. And yeah, I'm entertained by the stuff that he does. Yeah, it's a good channel. Fish says, don't think Eddie's keen to be fair. Yeah, it'll be interesting, his response to that. It will be interesting. God of War says, totally agree. The heavyweight division matchmaking in the last year was so boring. Yeah, it hasn't been much chop. We need better matchmaking in general. So we're already being a little bit off the sort of topic here, which was the Frank Warren, his comments. What did you make of them? But we'll go for another few minutes. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible that are left. I'm actually keeping up with the chat largely. So yeah, it's good. Often I fall behind 5 or 10 minutes. So Will says, do I follow all other divisions in the sport to some extent? If so, which division aside from heavyweight division is your favorite? For me, aside from heavyweight, I like light, welter, middle, super middleweight, light heavyweight best. Yeah, I follow pretty much down to 126, relatively closely. If there's a good fight in those divisions, I'll be watching. I mean, there's certain divisions, I think at the moment, 135 has really been quite hot. 147 is always a good division. Middleweight has obviously been a good division as well. 175, a lot of interesting fights, a lot of good fighters there too. I mean, but, any division, if there's this is the thing. I mean, I never understand when people are just, supporting one promoter and one promoter's cards and not watching anything else. I'm a boxing fan first and foremost, and this channel I cover heavyweight exclusively, but as a fan, I'm watching stuff all across the good fight. That's how I look at it. as a fan, I want to see the good fights, and we haven't been getting enough of them. So Hell's Bells says, would Frank reach out if his business was doing well? He continues, it feels like he wants in on the fight camp opportunities as the upfront costs have been paid by Matchroom and won't impact Warren. He would just provide fighters and make a profit, my opinion. Yeah, but is he talking about maximizing the sort of fight camp opportunity? It may not be that. They may be thinking more long term. They may have done some planning across the next year to 18 months and gone, look, we need to sort of change what we're doing. There's an opportunity here. Let's sort of float this out publicly and see what the reaction is. So Liam is saying that he's jumping in halfway through Kia ora Boxing Squared. So we've been talking about this topic. Frank Warren's comments, how realistic is this? I mean, personally, I would like to see most of those fights that he's named. I think it's potentially a very good opportunity to get some of the fights that we want. We're always moaning about we want the best fights, the best fighting the best. And if they can bridge the divide, I'm all for it. But how realistic is it? And obviously the questions about why now, what's the motivations? And Unger is sort of echoing some of the sentiments saying, who cares what Frank's reasons are? Do you not want to see those fights? Yeah, I mean, as a fan, at the end of the day, I'm not getting any of the money, but I want the fights. And this is what we're always talking about. Jesper says, Frank's success is heavily linked to Dubois. Take him out of the equation, and there isn't much else there. Eddie has AJ, but also a much broader stable if AJ retired, hence why Frank needs Eddie. Casual Cucumber, a lot of the fights will only happen if they're mandated. Yep, probably right. Woker Sam says, is it me or are you lagging a little? I'm not aware if I'm lagging. Okay, I've just seen something saying dropped frames detected 49% over the last 2 minutes, a minute ago. So if there was a bit of lag, apologies for that. Sometimes it can be the Wi-Fi might just sort of cut in and out for a second. Kevin says, what about Ruiz? Any word on him? Well, we'll have to see if he's going to fight Areola. Manuel Charles making a play. I'm not really interested in that fight. Ibrahim says, Little Jenkins versus Ben Frank swore he would die, then let that happen, but wants us to believe he's ready. Isaac says, how far do you think Murat Gassiev can go in the heavyweight division if he is injury-free? Well, we need to see him at the weight first. It's hard to make predictions if we haven't seen him fighting anyone good. He has looked, I've sort of thought he's looked a little bit full in the face. I don't know what sort of, a lot of training videos he's been coming out with, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Seemingly he's going to be fighting soon, we'll have to see. So Unger says, White made it clear he fights for money. Dubois versus White would be White's biggest pay-per-view. Will Magic Man at Boxing Squared. Yes, there are many other great boxing channels out there, but yours is a class above most of them, and you don't succumb to the use of profanity like some others do. Well, occasionally I've let the odd word slip, and some words that some may consider profanity, I don't. And I won't sort of list them because then that would be sort of, what you're saying would not be true. But yeah. Thank you for the compliment there. Appreciate it. Retro says another loss via KO for White. Yeah, I mean, that'd be an interesting fight. I mean, Dubois is still a bit green. Dillian White, obviously more seasoned now. But I think Daniel Dubois, with his power punching, if he caught up with White, could be an early night. But then again, same for White. I mean, we haven't seen Dubois tested in the way that we need to see him tested. That's why the Joyce fight is a good fight, because, a lot of people are all in on Dubois at the moment. But for me, we've got to see more. But there's a reason he's the number one heavyweight prospect in the world, because we like what we see, but we need more. Liam says Piccoli versus Dubois would be more likely than White versus Dubois. What do you think, BS? Yeah, probably. I mean, at some point, Piccoli, depending on the opportunities he gets at Matchroom, he's already been at Cyclone, so potentially he could end up going elsewhere. I could see Piccoli moving on at some point if he doesn't sort of get traction, and if it does become a point where Dubois is needing that level, I could totally see Piccoli going over and him ending up having a fight with Dubois. That makes a lot of sense. John says, Boxing Squared, who would you like to see Joseph Parker in with next? I feel he needs a couple of decent top 30 wins. Maybe someone like an Otto Varlin would be a good matchup, then maybe Chisora. Yeah, I'm not. I don't have. I'm not going to name any names who I think I'd like to see him in with next because I don't have high expectations. Clearly, David Higgins with this event, he's tried to organise with New Zealand, but it's gone in New Zealand. It's gone very quiet. I don't think they're looking for the best name. They're looking for activity rather than legacy. Vegan Power said, head of Sky Sports Adam Smith has been meeting with Frank for the last few months. Eddie's off to DAZN. You might see a case that maybe they could have cards on both, or maybe Frank Warren does go to Sky. I think there could end up being a number of promoters that come back to Sky. Ibrahim says, okay, responding to Unga there. Joe says, Warren is wanting Eddie because he needs him or he'll become irrelevant. Well, I don't think he'll become irrelevant without him, but they could be looking at the landscape if this continues, the pandemic, social distancing, no crowd, 12 to 18 months, that it really affects the business model, not just for them, but a lot of promoters, even ones with TV deals, they will be doing it tougher than they otherwise would have. Ibrahim says Areola magically appears number 7 on the WBA rankings. Yep, did a video on that, must have been a month or two ago. Yeah, I mean, to me, that signals he's fighting Ruiz Jr. and that it's going to be locked in. I don't think Manuel Chao will get that. See. So Will says Fury versus AJ is obviously a barn burner of a matchup. And it'll be, one of those things, it's going to be 2 fights. So we have to consider, and I think what they would do, the loser or the winner, even if they had other mandatories incoming, they're going to take the rematch because the winner would become undisputed. And they would just have the rematch because it'd be one of the biggest legacy fights. Even the rematch is a massive legacy fight for both. One would be looking for retribution, the other for a bit more legacy, and obviously tens of millions of dollars. Who knows? Maybe 7 figures. No, not 7 figures. 9 figures. I guess it would be. Will says, Gorman Allen is interesting, but as a fan of Allen, I don't think it'd be the best move now, considering he said he wants to build properly at this time. Yeah, but what does build properly at this time mean? Because, where's he going? I mean, the fact that he's considering August the 22nd at a couple of weeks' notice, that doesn't tell me that his mindset has really changed. It tells me he'll go on there if he gets a number he likes. Force Ghost Fabio says, good morning. We've come right at the back end of the stream. We're 48 minutes in now. We're sort of drifting off topic now, but 64 in the building, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. So we were talking Frank Warren today, his comments, where have they come from? Obviously we've been speculating. Is it possible? Can we get some of those fights? And even if they did work together, what does that look like? Could they work together? Pretty acrimonious relationship between the pair, between Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn. Could it work? And if it does work, what does that look like to something else? Yeah, I mean, lots of questions. I like the idea of it, and as a fan, I want all the fights. That's just the thing. I mean, I don't want to see mismatches galore over the place or, second-rate matchups because people are in other promotional silos. But at the end of the day, boxing, those other things, the out of the ring, the politics, all that, it factors so heavily into what we see in the ring. Jesper says Buatsi Yard will not be sharing a ring anytime soon. Retro Man is in Korea. He says Korea here. Actually, Buatsi and Yard, it's a really interesting fight, but I guess a question about Buatsi is, why has he been moved so slowly? Coming out of the 2016 class, a medalist as well. It's just sort of been really nothing to write home about. Solo Raider has with the super chat there. I'm not sure if it's come up with a message. We'll see. No. Shot bro, thank you for the super chat there. Do appreciate it. Ibrahim says they should have been working together all along, and the animosity is from Frank's side. I don't think it's just from his side. I think there's a fair amount of needling from the Hearn side. There's no love lost between the pair. Unga says if Don King and Bob Arum could work together, anyone can work together. And remembering, when it's all about money, it is boxing after all. If, like I mentioned earlier, one of my old bosses used to say, nothing sharpens the mind like the side of the guillotine. So if there is financial pressure, It might be something now that Frank Warren is signaling, trying to get the relationship back on track, maybe get something on the line for, may not be for next month or a couple of months, might be 6 months down the line. But at some point, if things persist, there's no fans, the money in the sport is restricted, they may just have to get round the table to make things work a bit better for themselves. They're, about making money after all. Retro says, anyone agree with me? Wilder will pull out due to a fake injury right before the fight, forcing Fury to quickly find somebody else. I don't think he will pull out. I think it will go through. I think he truly believes he can win. Whether he can, that's another story. But I don't. If it was a case there was some sort of injury or pull out before the fight, it's not a mandated fight as such. It's just that it's a contracted fight. Fury may go into a training camp and on to the next fight. Joseph Bacon says, why can't the two promoters run a tournament even for prospects? Yeah, they can be fraught too, especially if organised by sanctioning bodies. So Vegan Power says, Unger is everywhere. Wow. Kevin says, on the cards. Okay, so last minute or two, get final comments in now and we'll wrap up. But I like this idea of what Frank Warren is proposing. How it is, it's unclear. And if nothing happens, I'm pretty sure that he would turn around and say they didn't want it. And it's a very deliberate promotional ploy coming out with what he said. It's coordinated and, they had graphics at the ready to support the interview that went out. So this has been in the pipeline. It wasn't just a spur of the moment thing and then sort of whipping stuff up. They've wanted to come out with this. But why now? Has the pressure come on Frank Warren from BT over ratings? Is it financial? Has the pressure come on Frank Warren from BT over ratings? Is it financial? Is it other reasons that it could be a whole confluence of factors that has led to the starts. Remembering they had several months to try to do some, if they really wanted to do this, they had months to try to do this, during lockdown to try and hash something out. Excuse me. I just have a sip of water. Got a bit of dust in my throat. Will says, whoever becomes undisputed, I hope they get a chance to defend them. I heard the sanctioning bodies are working on that to make sure it doesn't happen. Who knows? It's the sanctioning bodies. Anything can and does happen. Who do you think wins in Joshua Wilder? I don't think that fight's going to happen. I just, it doesn't seem likely that's going to happen now. I think that ship has sailed. I was about to say horse has sailed, but that wouldn't have sort of made any sense, would it? Ibrahim says, it should have been that way. Eddie works with all the other promoters in the UK. Or could you turn that around and say other promoters are forced to work with Eddie Hearn because he has the Sky contract? You could look at it that way too. Vegan says, will the Eddie Hearn fans want this to happen? I said, no, sadly. I hope that, some of these fights at least come off. I mean, some of them you can kind of go, that might be a bit unrealistic. But there is some of them that you can go, that should be a totally makeable fight. And that they're on a similar, comparable level. Let's hope we see it. And some of them may happen anyway. I think Joshua and Fury, there's the will for that to happen. They've effectively got an in-principle sort of agreement that if they keep winning, they'll have it. Do I think Wilder retires if he loses to Fury in the third fight? No, I don't think so. And I don't think his management would want him to either. This is the time in their career because he's a commodity now. He can make the money. I could see him stepping into, I said this in a live stream the other week, see him stepping into a fight with someone like Andy Ruiz. You could bill it as they've both been champions, who will rise again sort of thing. Lucky you in New Zealand, the only place in the world where a cough doesn't induce panic. Actually, got to say though, it was a weird time during the lockdown. You go to the supermarket, and it was deathly quiet, and there were some maniacs walking around, no mask, and because masks weren't mandatory or anything, but someone did that, there'd be 10 people who'd just turn around and just stare at them, and they wouldn't continue the behaviour. Liam says, well, Fury versus Joshua won't be undisputed. Joshua will drop the WBO. I don't know if he will. I think they'll try to keep it together if they can. Force Ghost Fabio, don't you think it's odd Ruiz Arreola hasn't been announced? You'd think it would have happened in September. Well, they haven't really announced their Fox schedule, so, till the end of the year or the next 6 months or whatever they're going to do. I mean, I think part of it is tied to that. I mean, Showtime come out with its schedule to the end of the year and some good cards. I think PBC is going to look to do a similar thing with Fox. So I'd expect it out soon. So, yeah, expect something in the next few weeks. Hopefully this sooner, so we get a bit of clarity about the heavyweights in particular who are going to be fighting, because the Showtime announcements, no real heavyweights from PBC on them. There was Otto Wallin versus Travis Kaufman. We already knew about that fight. That's on August the 15th. But apart from that, there wasn't anything else big, sort of your Charles Martins, Adam Kovnatsky, Gerald Washington, Andy Ruiz, yada, yada, yada. None of them were announced on those cards. So who knows? So Hervage, I apologize if I'm butchering that. I know. I hate UFC model, but they make fights that fans want. And that's the sort of rub. As fans, often we're a bit more invested and we hear the purses and people knocking back off us, all that sort of stuff, but we don't get any of the money. At the end of the day, fights fall over mostly because of money. In the UFC, they make the fights, and obviously the fighters don't get paid nearly as well, as boxers in general. That's smaller in UFC. But they do get the fights that, UFC fans want to see. And I think as a boxing fan, that's frustrating seeing that we don't have something similar. But it's a monopoly, so there's cons on that sort of side of the fence too. Jesper says, you nailed it on the head there, Squared. I see this as a publicity stunt from Fish Eyes. He needs to be specific about what fights he wants. Well, he's named those 10. But it's one thing to say this in public, but is he going to act upon it? Is he going to commit to meeting and try to get something going? Obviously, he probably needs to get a bit of a read. Is Eddie Hearn and Matchroom interested in this? But it can't just be, like a call out just sort of thrown out there and forgotten about. You got to sort of act upon it. Does he really want to make this happen? And if so, what's he going to do? Unger says PBC have gone back to their 2015 matchmaking. Who would have thought PBC would be putting on the most competitive fights in 2020? And I don't care who the promoters are. If they're good fights, that's the main thing. I'll be tuning in if there's a good fight. I mean, some of these top rank cards, these comeback cards, and I sort of hate to sort of keep repeating it, but they've been garbage for the most part. Just mismatches galore, or just fights that shouldn't even be on TV. But we'll wrap it up there. We're fast approaching an hour here. So, Frank Warren, his statements. Thank you for contributing to the discussion. Your thoughts on what he has had to say. We'll see if it goes anywhere. It sounds good, but is it going to end up proving, like a lot of call-outs in boxing, a bit hollow? Will there be some follow-through? We'll wait with interest. Drop a comment, loud and often. I probably shouldn't have been going off and saying that. It just sort of came off the tongue as it does. But this will be uploaded, I think if you're listening on archive, you got to the end of the stream. So what am I talking about? It's 11 o'clock now. I'm getting tired. I'm just going to end it. So